Ladies and gentlemen, seekers of light and secret knowledge wherever you may be, you are listening to Points of Light Radio, the podcast dedicated to taking you past the apron and behind the closed doors of lodges everywhere. And here is your host, Stan Miller.
Greetings, brothers and sisters. Shalom. Assalamu alaikum. Ad Nastana. It's a pleasure to be back with you here on Points of Light Radio. In our efforts to dig into fraternal history here in 2024 and learn more about where we come from, we'll be investigating the Ladies of the Maccabees, or as they were eventually called, the Ladies of the Modern Maccabees. Now, you have seen the Knights of the Maccabees discussed here on Points of Light Radio in past segments. In the March 11th, 2023 segment of Points of Light Radio, I fellowshipped with Sir Knight Aaron Rasmussen Bates, and he was a member of the Knights of the Maccabees in California, a more, shall we say, a modernized version of them, shall we say, where they were trying to resurrect the order. And again, on December 11th, 2023, where I covered two fraternal orders, one of them being in that segment, the Knights of the Maccabees, from a historic, shall we say, a more historic standpoint. And that was, if you haven't watched those segments, as I always say to you in these instances, it's best to go back and watch them, because they will really tie in well with what you're about to see today. And of course, as we know from watching, especially on the December 2023 segment, where the Knights of the Maccabees were an absolutely incredible, and I might add, Canadian order. But here again, as we go along in this particular segment, you will discover that the Ladies of the Maccabees was in many ways ahead of its time. So I can't wait to really dig into this topic today. So, as I always ask you, are you still thirsty for knowledge? Are you still searching for the light? Then you just trim your lamp and follow me. The Ladies of the Maccabees were founded on March 25th, 1886, when 9 ladies met at the home of Adelphia Gray Sword, seen here, at her home in Muskegon, Michigan. In 1892, the Ladies of the Maccabees were renamed the Ladies of Modern Maccabees, and they were the first female auxiliary of the Knights of the Maccabees. And the Ladies of the Maccabees, or later the Ladies of the Modern Maccabees, were the first fraternal benefit society operated exclusively by women and for women. Now, what the women started, though, that day on March 25th, 1886, was the first local club, or hive, as they would go on to call them. Now, after several failed attempts, permission was given to create a great hive, or as we call them with most organizations, a Grand Lodge, for the state of Michigan, 1888. And the Great Hive of Michigan was chartered in May 1890. Now, great hives were then founded in other states such as Ohio and New York, and a Supreme Hive was established, or Grand Lodge for the whole organization, on October 1st, 1892. Now, 1892 was also the year of the split where the Ladies of the Modern Maccabees were formed, that I told you about earlier. And the Ladies of the Modern Maccabees would be led by a school teacher named Bina West Miller. I love those Millers, right? And she wanted to build a fraternal insurance society just for women and was successful in her efforts. By late 1896, there were great hives or grand lodges in half the states in the Union, as well as Canada. And membership was up to 66,000, with 33,000 just in Michigan alone, right? So think about that. Within 10 years of their formation, that many women belonged to this organization. I think that's interesting. And in 1915, the Ladies of the Modern Maccabees had approximately 179,719 members, and they would form the Women's Benefit Association. Now, the Ladies of the Maccabees merged in with the Knights, or their male companions, in 1926. In 1966, the Women's Benefit Association would become the North American Benefit Association. Wasn't that interesting? How do you feel about the Ladies of the Maccabees, brothers and sisters? I'll give you some of my thoughts and observations. First of all, let's look at this logo. Okay, it's got rings in it. Who else have you seen here, featured here in Points of Light Radio, that uses rings in their symbolism? How about Odd Fellowship, those 3 rings of fellowship, right? Who else uses the cross and crown, or even that beehive? Okay, it's not supposed to happen, but it did, and probably still does in fraternalism. You're not really supposed to, use the your ritual and symbolism to help create other organizations, but it, like I said, it has and does happen, probably still goes on today, right? Where these fraternal organizations are borrowing this kind of thing. And let's be honest, women were not allowed into Odd Fellowship back when the Ladies of the Maccabees was being formed. So quite obviously, husband and wife teams, shall we say, were working together to design the ritual and symbolism for the Ladies of the Maccabees. And of course, they went on to be the Ladies of the Modern Maccabees. Let's face it, that's probably what happened, right? Another observation I have is that within 4 years of their founding, the Ladies of the Maccabees had great hives, or as I say, grand lodges, in half the states in the Union, as well as Canada, and their membership was up to 66,000. It's an organization that grew fast, but let's look at that. If it was a mixed lodge or an all-male lodge, it probably would have grown faster. And one of the many reasons they weren't higher than 66,000 in numbers at that point probably was the expectation was that women were to stay at home, and they were probably in many cases forced to stay at home in those days. So they didn't have the chance to get out and join things like this. But more importantly, this was the first fraternal benefit society that was operated exclusively by women and for women, right? Like, is it just me? Or could it be that fraternal organizations and fraternalism has historically been ahead of governments and business when it comes to the needs and desires of the average citizen? Okay, you've seen so much of that represented here on Points of Light Radio, particularly in these historic segments, where many of the lodgers I've featured, and as I said, especially in these historic segments, they were mixed lodges that allowed both men and women to be part of it, and also even mixed races, shall we say, to sit in the same lodges. Long before government designed legislation right, on these kinds of issues. Fraternalism was ahead of them on that. I think it's one of the things I love about fraternalism. I really do, right? And if you notice that many provided insurance for their men long before government stepped in there, right? Now, here again, as well, think of it. This was a group that was ahead of its time. Before there ever was co-masonry or Freemasonry for women, like you've seen here on Points of Light Radio, this was a group and a fraternal benefit society that was just for women, right? It was a group, as I said, that was ahead of its time, only it was run exclusively by women and for women. I love that. I really do, right? Before the suffragette movement really got started or on its feet, the ladies of the Modern Maccabees were doing great work for women, right? I really believe that women today owe this group something. I really do, because these ladies were pioneers. And I'll close with that. I hope you enjoyed this. Before I go, I want to remind you that this podcast is available on both YouTube and Spreaker. Please share, like, and subscribe when viewing Points of Light Radio on YouTube. I also welcome your comments and input. You can follow Points of Light Radio on my Facebook page at facebook.com/Points of Light Radio. My Twitter handle, or X handle now, I guess they call it, is at PO Light Radio. You can see the link to my Spotify channel as well as my Points of Light Radio store. Now, I wasn't going to say this, but I will say it. You can also see a link, a PayPal link, where you can leave a voluntary donation to the Points of Light Radio in this segment. And I would appreciate it. I will use that money to move the podcast forward. Brothers and sisters, until we meet again, just step into the light.